We're diving deep into the first half of 2025 for China. We want to cut through some of that noise, give you a clear, evidence-based look at its economic performance, its unique policy approaches, and maybe what the future holds. We've gone through a lot of sources, articles, research, our own notes, really trying to connect the dots for you. Our mission to leave you feeling informed, maybe with some surprising facts and, a well-rounded perspective, all while respecting your time, of course. So let's start with the big picture. Think about all those global headwinds, trade stuff, geopolitics. What's the overall snapshot for China's economy in H1 2025?
Well, what's really quite fascinating here is that despite those significant global challenges you mentioned, China's economy has shown, I'd say, remarkable resilience. It's actually been a very steady and robust first half. We're looking at real GDP growth of about 5.3% for the period, which is, quite a strong number, especially given the complexities like the U.S. trade situation and other international shifts.
5.3%. Okay, and how does that break down domestically?
Domestically, the data looks pretty healthy, too. Retail sales of goods grew around 5%. Online sales were even higher. Industrial production was up a solid 6.3% for the first half. And fixed asset investments, well, despite a bit of a drag from the real estate sector, they stayed healthy at 2.8% overall.
And trade. We hear so much about tensions.
Trade has also been a bright spot, actually. Strong export growth, about 7% for the first 7 months. That contributed something like 1.7 percentage points to GDP growth in the first half. That's roughly 30% of the total, which, is a considerable achievement considering those ongoing trade issues.
That really is an impressive set of numbers, especially with all the talk of global slowdowns. But here's where it gets really interesting, I think. This isn't just about speed, is it? You've mentioned before some pretty significant structural upgrading happening. Can you elaborate on that? What's driving those deeper changes?
Absolutely. And you're right, the structural improvements are perhaps even more compelling than the headline numbers. We're seeing rapid technological advancements, like the widespread application of AI across different sectors, and the active development of humanoid robots, moving them out of the lab and into practical applications. This isn't just theory anymore.
Right.
What some are calling the new trail economy, these emerging high-tech sectors, it now accounts for an impressive 18% of GDP. That's up from almost nothing just a few years back.
No.
It's a huge shift in the type of growth.
Wow, 18% already.
Exactly. And here's a really clear sign of this manufacturing prowess. China became the largest auto exporter for the second year running, overtaking Japan. So the economy isn't just growing, it's fundamentally transforming its industrial base.
That paints a powerful picture, resilience, transformation. But, okay, like any huge economy, there have to be weak points. So what does this all mean for the everyday person? What are the specific soft spots you're watching, and how might they be impacting households?
Yeah, that raises a really important point about those weaker areas. The property sector is definitely one. Investment in real estate, it declined by 12% in July. That's actually an acceleration of the decline we've been seeing. And housing prices are continuing to fall. This obviously impacts household wealth and confidence. There was a recent survey by the PBOC, China's central bank, showing over 60% of households are still prioritizing saving. Only about 20% are looking to consume more right now. That's a pretty clear signal that confidence, well, it could be stronger.
60% saving.
Yeah.
That's high.
It is. But there's some important context here, too. There's been a recent stock market rally, which seems to have some legs, and that could help boost confidence moving into the second half. And on the trade front, that tariff truce with the U.S., it's continuing for another 3 months at least. So while some of that first half export front loading might ease off, overall, the government's 5% growth target for the year, it still seems quite within reach. Challenges exist, yes, but strategic interventions and those underlying strengths suggest a, let's say, manageable path forward.
You just mentioned strategic interventions. That leads us perfectly into the government's role, especially fiscal policy. It sounds like China is using its fiscal levers not just as a temporary patch, but more like a strategic engine, really aiming to boost domestic demand structurally.
That's precisely right. The government is playing a very active role here. We've seen significant fiscal expansion, about 3.4% year on year for the first 7 months. And what's particularly notable, I think, is who is doing the spending. It's mostly driven by the central government. Their spending expanded around 8% compared to local government spending, which was just over 2%.
And that's seen as the right way to do it.
Generally, yes. It's seen as the right approach because the central government has greater financing power. It can coordinate these larger scale initiatives more effectively. And looking bigger picture, the National People's Congress, the NPC, They already raised the deficit spending target back in March from 3% up to 4% of GDP. This wasn't just reactive. It was a deliberate, proactive move to counteract the trade war impact, the post-COVID recovery stuff, and of course the real estate downturn. It signals a strategic fiscal stance.
Right. Now, many people, especially maybe in the West, might think fiscal policy is mainly for downturns,
Mhm.
a temporary fix. But you seem to be suggesting something more profound in China's case, that it's not just cyclical but structural. How different is their approach, really?
Indeed, I think that's a key distinction. In China's system, the market economy with Chinese socialism characteristics, the public sector isn't just an add-on. It's viewed as an integral part of the economy. So fiscal policy here is fundamentally a structural tool, not just a cyclical one. Public investments are seen as crucial for that ongoing industrial upgrading we talked about.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Look at electric vehicles. The government has been instrumental in building millions, literally millions, of EV charging stations across the country. That infrastructure was absolutely essential for the, well, explosive growth of the domestic EV industry. You couldn't have had one without the other.
Go.
Same thing with the massive rollout of 5G stations. That's vital infrastructure for the whole Internet of Things ecosystem. And even when the goal is boosting consumption, government support matters structurally through job creation, income growth, a robust social safety net. All of that reduces the need for people to save quite so much out of precaution, making households more willing to spend. So it's not just about simulating demand today, it's about actively shaping the long-term economic landscape.
That really does reframe things. So this immense fiscal power, where exactly is it being deployed? Can you sort of drill down into the main buckets of intervention?
Certainly. We can think about it in roughly three core dimensions, where this fiscal policy is really making an impact. The first is foundational economic infrastructure. This is ongoing, large-scale stuff. China continues extensive investments in areas like high-speed rail, which isn't just about moving people faster. It's crucial for integrating supply chains and logistics across these vast regions, vital for industrial ecosystems.
Right, connecting everything up.
Exactly. Plus, heavy investment in 5G stations supporting the Internet of Things, as I mentioned, and power generation utilities. You need reliable power for AI, for advanced manufacturing. These are long-term structural investments underpinning future growth.
Okay, bucket one, infrastructure. What's next?
The second bucket is industry-specific support. This is more targeted. It involves government spending on things like subsidies, R&D support, and local governments helping businesses set up shop, build supply chains within their regions. Now, it's important to note, some Western media narratives about excessive subsidies can sometimes be, let's say, a bit overblown in certain interpretations. These interventions are often part of broader industrial strategies aimed at fostering key emerging sectors, not just, propping up failing old ones. It's strategic guidance.
Guiding development, not just bailing out. Got it. And the third bucket.
The third bucket is the social safety net. And this is interesting because a lot of it involves significant hidden transfers and in-kind services to households, stuff that often doesn't get fully captured in standard economic statistics.
Like what?
Think subsidized meals in workplaces or schools, widespread public health care access, extensive public education systems. This actually helps explain something curious: why China's official retail sales figures can sometimes seem larger than reported consumption amounts. It's because many services that you'd pay for privately elsewhere are publicly provided in China.
Oh, okay.
These measures directly boost household well-being, they reduce the need for precautionary saving, and ultimately they free up discretionary income for other things.
That leads us neatly to another point that always comes up, this idea that China's consumption to GDP ratio is too low. And the common call, often from outside China, is that they need to boost household consumption, maybe even cut back on investment to do it. What's your take on that whole debate?
Yeah, that's a persistent narrative, but from my perspective, this debate often starts from a statistical misunderstanding, or at least an incomplete picture. China's consumption is frequently, let's say, undercounted in standard comparisons. Why? Because, as we just discussed, public consumption and those in-kind transfers often get excluded from the usual calculations.
Right.
If you actually account for those, China's disposable income to GDP ratio looks much more like around 60%, which is pretty similar to many OECD averages in Europe and Asia. So the idea that Chinese households are inherently deprived or lack income compared to others, it's largely a misconception if you look comprehensively.
Okay, so the measurement itself is part of the issue. What about that surge in savings, then, if income isn't the core problem?
Exactly. That recent huge increase in household savings, what was it, $23 trillion USD equivalent, 162 trillion RMB, in the first 7 months, that's largely driven by precautionary purposes.
Yeah.
It's a direct result of uncertainty. Lingering effects from COVID lockdowns, yes, but also the downturn in the real estate sector. People are saving because they're worried about the future, about jobs, about property values falling further, not necessarily because they can't afford to consume right now.
So it's about confidence, not capacity.
Precisely. And moreover, sustained consumption growth doesn't just appear out of nowhere. It primarily comes from what economists call autonomous demand. I mean, things like investment, exports, government spending. These are the forces that drive production, create jobs, boost incomes, and then people consume more. The idea of sort of cutting investment in order to boost consumption, it's starting with the wrong question, frankly. It's not really desirable for sustained, healthy growth. You need to build the income base first.
That's a really critical reframing. Okay, this link between production, income, and consumption, it ties into another hot topic, involution competition and deflation fears. We hear a lot in Western discourse about this idea of intense, maybe unhealthy competition, and China experiencing deflation often framed as a sign of deep economic trouble. How do you see that?
Right, the involution and deflation narratives. What's fascinating here is that the Western discourse on China's deflation, well, it feels somewhat overblown, especially regarding its supposed disastrous consequences. If you look historically, deflation, like in the Great Depression, that was caused by a sharp decline in demand, a collapse.
Yeah.
What seems to be happening in China today is fundamentally different. It appears primarily driven by tremendous technological breakthroughs and a rapid expansion of productivity growth. Supply is simply growing faster than demand, not because demand is collapsing, but because supply is becoming much more efficient, much more productive.
So more stuff being made more cheaply, basically.
Essentially, yes. Now, that said, involution competition, that intense price cutting, it can be undesirable,
Yeah.
especially if it cuts too deeply into business profits. And we did see industrial profits decline, 1.8% in the first 7 months. That is a concern. There's also a valid worry about local governments perhaps subsidizing loss-making local champions, which isn't healthy competition.
Right, propping up inefficiencies.
Exactly. So there's definitely a need to rein in that kind of unhealthy cutthroat competition, to encourage innovation and quality, not just rock-bottom prices at any cost. However, these claims you hear about overcapacity in sectors like, say, electric vehicles, they often feel misplaced. These sectors actually have huge global market demand. The real overcapacity issues are more likely in older, construction-related industries, cement, steel, which are undergoing necessary adjustments anyway.
So distinguish between sectors.
Absolutely. And critically, price reductions that are driven by good things, better technology, higher productivity, scale effects, the cost difference between building 10,000 cars versus just one, those are actually beneficial for the economy. They make products more accessible, they boost real purchasing power, they generate more demand in the long run. So it's important to be critical. Some analysts argue, and I think there's some merit here, that this Western narrative sometimes misunderstands China's reality, or perhaps reflects other geopolitical agendas aimed at containing China's competitiveness in these key emerging industries. My view. Chinese policymakers probably shouldn't take this potentially overblown narrative too seriously. Supporting investment in structural upgrading remains key.
That's a crucial distinction, good price drops versus bad deflation.
Huh.
Okay, let's shift gears and look ahead. China's famous for its 5-year plans. What are the big priorities likely to be for the upcoming 15th one?
Looking ahead to the 15th five-year plan, the expectation is a continued emphasis on what some call the engineer economy, meaning the productive side remains central, focusing heavily on manufacturing capacity, technological innovations, AI, humanoids, biotech, renewables. This is seen as the fundamental backbone of China's economic growth and productivity gains.
So still supply-side focused primarily?
Primarily, yes. But there will also be an acknowledged increased focus on the demand side and consumption. That's clear. But, and this is important, it likely won't come at the expense of investment and production. The two need to go hand in hand. The real key for boosting consumption sustainably will be boosting household confidence. That means addressing concerns about jobs, stabilizing the real estate market, and critically strengthening the social safety net, pensions, healthcare, unemployment benefits. It's about ensuring sustainable consumption by supporting the underlying drivers of income and security, not just trying to force people to spend money they're hesitant to part with.
Makes sense. And for the more immediate future, the rest of 2025, what's your outlook? Key headwinds, key tailwinds we should keep an eye on.
Okay, for the second half of 2025, let's look at both sides. On the headwinds side, there's definitely uncertainty around that U.S.-China trade truce ending. What happens next? Potential Fed interest rate changes could impact global capital flows, which always affects China. That front-loading of exports we saw in H1 might dissipate, potentially slowing trade growth compared to the first half.
Right.
Domestically, some stimulus programs, particularly trading ones, might lose steam. That could necessitate new, perhaps more direct stimulus measures. And of course, the real estate sector remains a significant headwind if stabilization efforts don't really take hold effectively.
Okay, those are some clear challenges. What about the positives, the tailwinds?
There's strong tailwinds, too. One interesting point is the U.S. is actually becoming less significant to China's total exports. It's down to about 11–12% now. Trade with Asian nations, Europe, Latin America, Africa. Those partnerships are much stronger and growing. Diversification helps.
Mm-hmm.
We're also seeing a policy pivot from just good stimulus towards services stimulus. Things like interest subsidies for consumer loans, support for service sector businesses. We also expect or hope for faster and more effective implementation of fiscal spending, especially on infrastructure. It dipped slightly in July, but there's room and need for improvement there.
And the stock market.
Yes, the stock market rally. It seems less bubble-like maybe than what we see elsewhere, and it seems particularly fueled by genuine excitement around AI development within China. That could provide a sustained confidence boost if it holds.
Okay. And one last narrative check. The balance sheet recession idea. We hear that sometimes when bank lending goes down.
Right, that's a good point to address.
Yeah.
The decline in bank lending often gets highlighted. But what's often missed is that this is actually being more than offset by a significant rise in equity financing. So companies are still raising money and investing, they're just using different channels. It suggests a shift in corporate funding methods, not necessarily a collapse in corporate activity or investment plans.
So less bank debt, more equity.
Interesting. Exactly. So, putting it all together, my overall conclusion is that, well, the Chicken Littles of the world, predicting China's imminent collapse, they're probably going to remain disappointed again this year. China's economy continues to exhibit a kind of steady-as-she-goes approach underpinned by these strategic, targeted policy interventions that have, frankly, shown considerable resilience so far.
That's a truly comprehensive look, thank you. We've really dug into China's impressive H1 2025 performance. Despite those headwinds, its very strategic, structural use of fiscal policy. We've unpacked the nuances around consumption and those deflation dynamics, and looked at its future-oriented planning. So what does all this mean for your understanding of the global economy? China's economic journey, this unique blend of strategic public investment, targeted industrial policies, a distinctive approach to growth, it often seems to defy conventional economic wisdom, doesn't it? How might this engineer economy model reshape our understanding of development? And what lessons or perhaps warnings does it offer other nations trying to navigate this rapidly changing global landscape? Something to chew on. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into China's economy. We hope you feel more informed and better equipped to understand the nuances behind those headlines.